firmware management that we added to Intune just at the end of June, so just a couple months ago. I'm also here with Ryan Williams, who's kind of my counterpart on the deployment service team. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we will get going.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I own the driver and firmware management scenario in the Windows Update for Business deployment service, which is what Intune has integrated to bring these capabilities to life.
Thank you, Ryan. So we're going to go through a few things today. Let's see. I'm going to skip some slides here. We're going to start with the demo. Let's get into the real stuff. Then we plan to go into roadmap of enhancements and things that we're planning to do. Hopefully most of it this year, but I think some of it's going to spill over into next year. And then if we have time, frequently asked questions. So normally we do this, Ryan and I, in about an hour talk. So we're going to try to go a little bit quicker in the interest of time. What I'm going to ask is, please go ahead and hold your questions. And then I'm going to watch the clock, and somebody can back me up as well. Try to stop at 1 or 10 minutes to the hour, and we'll try to take all the questions we can at that time. And if it turns out there aren't any, we'll just go a little bit further on in the content. So without further ado, let's start off with the demo. And so I'm showing here the new devices preview because I actually like what we're doing with Windows 10. We've got a single node here. In the commercial Intune in that preview. So when you select Windows 10 and later updates, we've got the different update policy types here at the top, and you'll see driver updates. So driver updates is a new policy type. When you create that policy, there's not a lot of settings here because most of it is kind of an operational policy. You get to choose whether or not to make driver approvals, which is deciding which drivers are going to go to the applicable devices in this policy, whether that's a manual policy. So what that means is once devices are added to the policy, when they scan for updates, they will not get any drivers any further until you have actually gone and approved those in the management console. And we'll show what that looks like. But that gives you full control over which specific drivers are being approved. With an automatic approval, a service will automatically approve all recommended drivers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between recommended and other drivers when we dive into a policy. And then we also have the ability to do a deferral here, which allows you to have multiple policies configured with different deferrals, so you can control and do a gradual deployment ring-based rollout of drivers as well. So the rest of it is normal, just assigning devices stuff in Intune. So we're going to go ahead and cancel that and go into an actual working policy. So one of the things that we've done here in this policy list view is, I'm going to refresh that real quick, is in addition to providing the, oh, I can't believe it did that. Demo gods have got me real quick, so we're going to go back to my tenant. But we've not only provided a list of policies and whether or not things are assigned in normal stuff, but we've gone and added this drivers to review, which is available primarily for the manual policies. But this is intended to be a call to action, meaning there's new recommended drivers that have not been reviewed. So in an automatic approval policy, because we automatically approve recommended drivers, that stays at 0. But if you're using a manual policy, we use this here as kind of a call to action. And you say, oh, there's something for me to go look at, so that you don't have to go dive into all your policies in order to see if there's new drivers available. So we're going to go ahead and click into Ryan's policy. And you can see we have the recommended drivers and the other drivers tab. So recommended drivers. Actually, I'm going to let Ryan, do you want to jump in here and talk about recommended versus other drivers? And then I'll come back and talk about approvals and states.
Certainly. So recommended drivers, so stepping back, publishers of the drivers get to choose how they publish drivers to Windows Update. They could choose whether it is going to be an automatic driver, meaning that in the non-managed scenario, it would automatically get offered devices, or it gets set as a manual driver, meaning that in the non-managed scenario, you would typically have to pull that driver and select it to the device. In the portal here, we break drivers up into recommended drivers and other drivers. Recommended drivers are all drivers for the devices assigned this policy that are newer than what's installed and published as automatic. Well, it's the latest one that's published as automatic for and recommended for your drivers. So these are all the drivers that we're highlighting as that the OEM is published as automatic, and it's the latest and greatest for your devices in a policy. The other drivers content is basically all manually published drivers or all older recommended driver or automatic drivers. So here we can see in the other section that we have like lower versions of this system hardware update driver available for the devices, but in the recommended column, there was a newer version available for it.
And one of the key things that Ryan touched on that is one of the real powers and benefits of this policy type is that you can see it's a short list here. This is not all the drivers that are available in Windows Update. These are the ones that are specifically currently applicable to devices that you've assigned to the policy. So it's a curated list, a focus list, if you will, that allows you to only see the things where there really are updates available for those devices. Which really helps to keep the number small. And I say small, we've seen some policies with several thousand other drivers, just because of the variety of devices that were assigned to it. We have also seen that as organizations start to approve the latest recommended drivers, even some of the other drivers, that number goes down significantly, because if you install the latest driver and there were 2 or 3 older versions of that driver in the other drivers tab, once that latest version is installed, all those older versions drop out of the list because they're no longer installable. They're no longer applicable. Ryan, is there anything else that you wanted to add before I start talking about approval status in the approval process?
I just want to provide a little color here, that feedback that we've had from people using this. One of the common ways to manage it is to put in, like, create groups and devices that are the same manufacturer. And a common question comes through is, hey, I added a bunch of, say, Dell devices to this policy, but I'm seeing like HP drivers or Lenovo drivers coming through. And those are typically associated with the peripherals attached to the hardware devices, because we pull in those types of updates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a great question here, like, are all the major vendors contributing to this? It's more than the major vendors as well, because there's been the ability to publish drivers in Windows Update for a long time. So all these policies are doing is tapping into that. So Ryan's service is connecting to Windows Update service and tapping into that to find out from that service, when a device scans for updates, which updates Windows Update found that were applicable, and provides that now to the service so that you have control over that. And Ryan's worked with several of the vendors that you list there. They're aware of this. We're providing feedback. We're hoping to see this get better. If you provide feedback to your vendors and say, hey, I want to use this policy, but these drivers aren't showing up, or the names aren't very helpful, or the driver class hasn't been helpful, I need you to do a little bit better job with how you publish them. That can be really helpful to the overall ecosystem. I'm going to talk about driver approvals now. So as you see, when a new driver becomes available, they all start off in needs review state, unless they're automatically approved in an automatic approval policy. And so when you select that driver, you have a couple of options. You can decline that driver, which is something we've added to Intune that keeps track of drivers that you've looked at and have decided that you don't want to deploy, and you can mark them as decline. What that helps to do is get that number of drivers to review on the policy list view back down to 0 without having to deploy them all. So decline is definitely an option, and then approve is an option. When you manually approve a driver, you are able to specify the start date for that driver, which is, this is the date when it will start becoming available to devices the next time they scan for updates. So you have the ability to control that here, which is really nice. Another thing I'll call out is, once you have an approved driver, I'm going to go ahead and close this for now, but you can then pause a driver. And so that stops offering that driver to new devices the next time they scan. So that helps if you find an issue and you want to, stop that from deploying while you investigate, or because that driver is not so great, you can pause that driver. Once a driver is, an automatically approved driver that's paused is back into a manual approval state. So you can then reapprove that driver. And when you do so, you'll specify the start date for reapproving that driver. You can pause it again later. You can reapprove it. You can go back and forth as much as possible. So really the only difference between a automatic approval policy and a manual approval policy is that the recommended drivers will get a start date based off of that deferral window you provided. And will automatically approve for that. You can still go in and pause that driver even before it gets started if you want to. So you can have an automatic approval, but then be on the lookout for like that one driver that you're like, yeah, those ones we don't go, those we don't use. So there's different strategies you can use to manage those drivers. Anything else that you want to add, Ryan, before I go into looking at the reports?
Did we talk about when the applicable devices count goes to 0?
We have not yet. I touched on it actually a little bit, but yeah, go ahead and add some more color to that.
Yeah, so the applicable devices column here, like we mentioned, we only show you drivers that are applicable to your devices. So once all the devices in this policy have taken and received and installed the update, that driver is no longer applicable to devices. And so that line item will fall off the list and no longer show up. If a device then scans later on and that driver becomes available, it'll pop up on this list. But essentially, we only show you devices or updates that are currently available for your devices. And basically anything that when applicable devices go to 0, it's no longer manageable because it's not going to be installed on any of your devices.
Yeah, and to add to that, one of the nice things too is let's say you approve a driver and it gets deployed to all the applicable devices, and then a new device is added to the policy that driver would be applicable to. The driver will show up back in the management list if you look at it, but it also retains its approved state. And so the next time that device scans, that driver that you approve will automatically be offered. You don't have to come back in and reapprove it if a new device is added that needs that driver. So that approval stays applicable or stays in the service so that if new devices show up, they just get deployed automatically. I did see one good question that we can answer real quick is, was the installation experience? Again, we're tapping into Windows Update, right? And so it's the Windows Update experience. Largely aligns with quality updates. So for example, if you have a deadline policy in place, deadline settings, the quality update deadline settings will apply to a driver update. Once the device scans and detects that update, it will apply the deadline settings. And so then you get the normal notification depending on your settings. They operate with the active hours. One of the things that we're actually looking at doing is, can we move all driver installs to be outside of active hours? Because as you know, some drivers do a little blip here and there. If it's a network driver, a Bluetooth driver, a video driver. And so if we can do that outside of active hours and then reboot as necessary along with the other reboots, we think that will provide a little bit better experience during the working day or the school day, depending on your case, so that doesn't happen to end users. That problem's been there, since for many years with driver updates and Windows updates. But we think that this approach will help commercial and education customers get that better experience.
There's also been one other question that I'd like to cover really quickly here in chat, and that is like, how quickly do drivers show up in here, right? If you're going and looking for a Dell update or a Lenovo update, how quickly can they show up here and what that behavior looks like? So we're dependent upon OEMs publishing the content to Windows Update, and we go through our own flighting process to make sure that when devices get installed, they're not seeing issues with that update. Now, for the most part, devices for drivers that get published to Windows Update will show up in our service pretty much right when they start the flighting process, but drivers that are published as automatic will only be available as an other driver until it completes the flighting process, and we've done all of our tests and validations. So there's a comment here in chat saying that they say they have seen drivers move from the other drivers to the recommended drivers, and that's because it is a newly published driver. It's available so that you can start your ring testing. You can get a critical update out as soon as you possibly can to, if there's an issue that update fixes for you. But then it will pop into the recommended section as soon as we've completed our full flighting and rolled it out as automatic. So you can see it hop between the tabs in that direction, especially for the latest and greatest updates.
All right, that's awesome. So we're gonna move forward a little bit. Remember, I'm saving some more time for questions at the end. So we have some great stuff we want to get to. So the reports are going to be under Windows Updates, and we've added the summary here at the bottom, of the list here. And basically, what we're doing is we're showing each of your policies that you have and the current status in there. Now, one of the interesting things, obviously, is that you can approve more than one driver per device. So in this summary, what we're actually trying to do is just help give you, a line of sight as to whether or not there's a problem or not that you want to go and investigate. And so we show the worst state for a given device if it's got multiple drivers in process. So for example, if it's exceeded with one driver, it's still in progress with another, but it failed a third one, we'll put that device for that policy into the error count. And we're trying to, work on good denominators, if you will. We want the numbers to add up as much as possible. So, the sum here of the device states should be pretty equivalent to the number of devices you have in the policy. But it is dependent on those devices that are applicable to the drivers that you've approved. All right, and then we also get a summary of how many drivers are paused or needs review in that policy as well. So again, a nice high-level view at the policy level. And then we try to summarize those up. We count the number of unique devices. So, right now we have one device that's in progress and 2 devices success. Turns out one of these devices is in both states, which is how we get 2 unique devices. But there's a nice summary here, but it's not showing you like at the driver level, right? So when you go into reports and do a Windows driver update report, and I've preloaded one for one of our test drivers, 1.001, we're now showing you the result for that driver, that unique driver. And so all the drivers that have been approved that we started to receive telemetry for will show up in this list that you can then generate a report for. And now what you'll see is what I like to call a device driver tuple of approvals and devices that are applicable in this report. So you can see, for example, we have a device that shows up twice for the same driver. And that's because it was actually approved in 2 different policies. So we have the policy column here that helps you to see that. Fortunately, we're showing that it succeeded in both of those policies. So it was only installed once. But we're tracking that status. And then we've got a third device here where it's currently in offer ready, meaning we're waiting for that device to scan for updates and to receive that driver. So the rest of this is, essentially the same as what we've done for feature updates and expedited updates. Same summary report, same columns, same fields. We're trying to provide a consistency there so that it is easier to use and easier to interpret the results. There's one other report that is often very useful. We may not have any data in it today just because of the way we've been testing in this particular tenant. But if you go to, with the old navigation, if you go to devices and monitor, you'll see that there's a driver update failures. And in the new devices view, you see when we bring up the monitor tab, we have driver update failures here. And if you go to view report there, we will provide a list of all your active policies and the number of devices with errors. And when you click into that, we're giving you, I don't have any errors here. I'll have to find one. As an example, we'll use a feature update failure. We provide the alert messages just the same way for drivers. And when you click on that alert message, we provide a deeper explanation of what the root cause of that problem is, as well as a recommendation for remediating it. And so that data is available. And if a device has multiple issues, it will actually show up with multiple rows. And the driver view will also show the driver name so that you can actually filter, for example, to a specific device and see if you've got a consistent error across drivers, or this driver is unique, or what have you. Anything else that you wanted to add about reporting real quick, Ryan, before we go back to our deck?
No, we can go back to the deck.
All right. So I'm going to gloss over that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about roadmap and planned enhancements. A lot of the enhancements have come from our top learnings that we did in the private preview. That was very useful for us. And what we've seen since we've released is very, very consistent feedback that these things are the top things that we need to address. The feature is, fully functional, it's useful, but these are things that are going to make the driver management just that much easier, that much more powerful and useful. And so that's what we're going to work on. That's what we're actually been starting to work on since we've done the release. So we did the release in Intune. We're working on top enhancements. And while we're working on those, and as we deliver those, we're then going to want to see how those improvements that we're about to show you, what's next after that, right? And so once those are in place, it'll kind of reset the feedback channel for us. And then we're going to look at feedback once those things are in place. So the first, one of the biggest asks is we show the list, we show the count of applicable devices, which is really great to have to know how many devices are going to impact. But the top feedback we've really received is, but what devices are those? Which ones are they? And in most of those cases, what you're really interested in is, hey, which device models are those? Because that gives you some insight, like who it's going to affect, what audience it's going to affect, what those devices are used for. In a lot of organizations, depends on the type of model, helps to give you that insight. So this isn't the final design, but the intent and what you'll be able to see is both the list of devices, and you'll have access to what manufacturer models those are. I'm hoping to be able to add all the columns from the devices view in Intune as available columns, and that these would be the default ones. Engineering team is taking a look to see if we can make that happen, and what the experience would be. We don't want to bog down loading up of this data too badly. That's the applicable devices view. The other really top feedback we've heard is, hey, these names, they're not all that useful. They're not all that clear. And even the driver class, there's a lot of them that just say other hardware that doesn't provide us with a lot more insight than that. We'd love to know more about what component on the device is that driver going to affect. And so again, not final design, but we're going to add to that managed driver tab the ability to see the list of affected hardware components that driver will go and touch on. And just to help illustrate that a little bit better, Ryan collected some good examples of some driver name, and then from the update catalog, what the driver model was. And this kind of shows the improvement of context that we think that provides. Ryan, do you want to touch on this a little bit more?
Sure, yeah, we can just go through here and show that just a little extra context can provide some extra clarity here on what the driver does or what it's targeting. So in these examples, like on the first one here, we can see that the HP Inc. firmware doesn't really provide context of what that is, but in the driver model, it returns that it's for an HPQ78 firmware. Basically, it tells you that this is the system that it's targeting. Same thing with the Lenovo firmware there. It tells you specifically that it's targeting that, or it's for that P360 system. Intel networking thing tells you exactly which card or in networking card that targets, providing a little extra context. And here, the Realtek Semiconductor Corp just says that it's USB, but what does that actually mean? We now know that it's a USB card reader. Of course, it also means that sometimes that the information you need is just, it's an example of that. It's not always going to be there. The Dell Inc. firmware one here, still in the extra driver model, says that it's just for a system firmware. 0.1.93. We've been having talks with our OEMs to try and clean this up and make it better going forward. But your help here is certainly would be appreciated. Would encourage you to talk with your OEMs and tell them what you need here. And then the last one, the Lenovo modder kind of shows you an example of how much information can actually be included here. This has 55 different models. And so this kind of goes to show a little bit of the challenge and complexity of showing this in the UX when there is a lot of content that can show up for that's what's applicable, or at least what this driver does and targets.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, and so that's actually, this last one illustrates why the UI mockup has a search field as well as a scroll bar and a list. So a lot of times there'll be one item, but when there's more, we wanted to make that a little bit easier to manage and to find what you're looking for. So that's what we're thinking there. Another one that we're looking at, we got the feedback actually really early, and I loved it. I thought this was a great idea. Is we want to be able to make it easy for you to align your driver updates with Patch Tuesday, including when you have deployment rings. And so you have different devices with different deferral windows for quality updates. And so, the UI becomes very simple. The work behind the scenes is nowhere near as simple. We have to do a bunch of interesting math. Patch Tuesday itself happens at a different time per time zone around the world. So we want to try to capture that as well. But the whole idea here is you'll be able to say, enable that to go. So when a new driver shows up and it's approved, that the start date, when automatically approved, is the next Patch Tuesday. And then if you are using like deployment rings plus the deferral days, so that you can make that align with your quality updates, and then have an automatic approval policy that you can just monitor, but you don't have to keep doing manual work every month, while avoiding the extra reboots that can come with drivers, because our OEM publishers publish drivers on their schedule anytime through the month. And so today, with an automatic approval policy, that deferral is from the time that it becomes available as automatically approved. And so you can have random updates. And most drivers don't require reboots, but occasionally they do. And that can cause an additional reboot notification and experience for end users. So it's great to align those. I know some customers today are using manual approvals to do that and are waiting for the feature to go to an automatic approval policy. And so when they manually approve, remember I showed the calendar, you get to specify that date. So they're either specifying Patch Tuesday or the appropriate days after that, and then doing the approvals usually like on Monday before the Patch Tuesday, and just bulk approving as many as they can. So speaking of bulk approvals, this is something else that we're going to add to the experience. So, in our demos, it was great. We showed 2 or 3 drivers, really easy to manage, depending on how many devices, especially if you are organizing your driver policies more by organization, where you have a variety of different hardware devices. You're going to have a growing list of drivers just because of that variety. And so bulk actions will help you to manage and be able to approve multiple drivers without having to go through and do it one by one at a time. So that will really save a lot of time. We've also talked to customers that are approving all the other drivers, which aren't automatically approved, or all of the other drivers that aren't of a certain type or something like that. Again, bulk editing will make that a lot easier. So that's coming. So those are the top things that we're looking at. I'm also looking at some additional reporting improvements and things like that. But to take us to the 10 minutes before the hour, there's some frequently asked questions we've received on almost every time we present this. And so we're going to try to touch on those really quick, and then I think we'll have time for Q&A. So Ryan, I believe these are your slides.
Yeah, so I know that we are running short on time here, so I'm going to fly through these just to give a context. One question that typically pops up is, what about BIOS passwords and what about BitLocker? So BIOS passwords, Windows Update provides BIOS updates to compatible devices using UEFI firmware interface or capsule update. When BIOS updates are delivered through Windows Update using the capsule update mechanism, the BIOS password is typically not required for the update process. Because of the secure and trusted nature of Windows Update and with our OEMs, we can provide that update through and deliver it to the BIOS without requiring the password. It's something unique that comes just through Windows Update, that even if you were to download it from, say, your OEM, Dell, Lenovo, it's not something that they can do. BitLocker, long story short, is that it works in most cases. BitLocker is primarily concerned just with firmware updates, and the delivery of the installation of the OS are for installation of OS drivers are not impacted by BitLocker. Devices using Secure Boot handle firmware updates securely and predictably without the use intervention from an admin. Firmware updates must be delivered through Windows Capsule Update mechanism to ensure this compatibility with BitLocker. And there's only one component here that OEMs and IHVs must preserve some very specific components in the update process to make sure that the BitLocker isn't triggered. And we've seen a couple of problems here in the past that have caused big BitLocker things, but this is something that we really don't see very much. But this is to call out that there are some very specific requirements needed. On the next page, the update experience, there are kind of, next slide, yeah. There are kind of two exceptions that we want to call out to the driver management flow. That is plug and play device drivers. Windows Update will automatically install the latest driver for new hardware when detected by the OS for the first time. So if there's a new keyboard, mouse, a camera that is being plugged in for the first time, we don't require management for the very first time to get that device functional and in its best performance. So we allow that first update to flow and make sure that the hardware is usable. Drivers are then manageable after that initial install. So no additional driver updates will be installed for the device without an approval through the service. And it's really easy to say, it's easy to determine looking in the logs that it comes from a separate channel in the Windows Update flow. So we can see that it's basically being done this way or through the plug and play channel or delivered through Windows Update. Extension drivers is another thing that we get commonly asked. To provide a little context, there's to know what an extension driver is. We talk about it as a base driver, is basically interacts directly with the hardware. Extension drivers work at a much higher level, processing data and commands between the base driver and the operating system, and they don't interact directly with the hardware. Extension drivers are not managed by the deployment service. They're typically just minor updates to the base driver package that can enhance, modify the functionality of the base driver. And extension drivers are crucial for enabling effective communication with the OS and the hardware. They basically can make the thing more compatible, simplify hardware management, enhance the stability, and optimize performance. And key point is that extension drivers are not used unless the base driver is already installed. So these flow without an approval. They can be very easily identified because there will be extension in the driver name. Yeah, thank you, David.
Hey, that's perfect timing. It is just about 10 minutes to the hour, so we can take questions. Got the camera to work. So, hi, everyone. And so, yeah, it's a good time for questions. Garrett, do we let folks come off mute, or are we just going to pull them from chat? Help us out here.
Yeah, let's if you have a question, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand and we'll just take the order that they come in. Feel free to come off mute and we'll go from there.
What did we miss?
Unless, of course, y'all presented so well that there's just no questions. There's Joseph. Joseph, go ahead and come off mute.
Hi, David. Quick question. Is there, I know when we looked at the reports options, is there going to be a scenario where drivers that are not approved show up in there for us to see a list of device, even just the list, or is that just going to be the list of that enhancement you talked about where we'll be able to see the list of devices that are applicable? Is it just going to be in that interface? Would that be in reporting also?
It won't be in reporting, so you're spot on that. If you haven't approved the driver, then you'll be able to see that which devices that driver is applicable to with the new applicable devices experience that we provide.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, we basically try to focus on only sending events to the reporting side for applicable drivers. Yeah, specifically. Otherwise, you're just going to get cluttered with a lot of information that doesn't really matter.
That list of drivers to choose from could just get so long with a whole bunch of unapproved drivers. And there wouldn't be any real useful data there other than which devices it was applicable to, which we're providing in the UI. Yeah. Awesome. Next question. I see there's more hands up. Awesome.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Hey, so I currently have Windows drivers allowed in our Windows Update setting, and I go back and forth of, is this the appropriate way of handling it? Have we had any issues? And potentially moving forward with approving or allowing manually approving or just automatically approving. Is there a way to maybe just kind of see which drivers are going to actually be like almost like a test run, or how would you recommend like testing a small subset just to see what drivers are actually, because when you have Windows drivers allowed, you really don't know what drivers are being updated, right?
Yeah, you're talking about the settings and update rings, right? Where it says
correct.
Drivers. So you need to leave that on for one thing. So that's a good point that we hadn't touched on, because if you use block there and then you try to also use our driver policies, it turns out that we'll offer the driver, but then when the device scans, because that setting's there, the client will reject it. So you do want those on in order to be able to deliver those drivers. But your question is a little bit more about the strategy of understanding the drivers and testing this out. And what's really great about the system is the recommended drivers are the same drivers that would still be deployed with the update ring setting set to allow. But now you have the visibility, you have that list of the drivers that are actively available. And if you do an automatic approval policy, you get to see what's being deployed. It's the exact same set, exactly. And now if you have a suspicion that one of those drivers is causing a problem, you can pause that driver. And you can also do rings and only pause the bad driver and let the other good drivers go through once you've had a chance to diagnose and debug that early ring. So we definitely still recommend the rings. And then like an early way you could go, if you're still like really wanting to flush this out and get a really good sense of what's going to work, have your first ring be like a 0-day deferral and automatic approval so that you don't have to do the effort to get drivers to those devices. Then you'll be able to use reporting and customer feedback to figure out which ones went to devices. And then you can have your second ring be more of a manual approval until you are comfortable with how the system works. And then you can switch to a automatic approval policy and do what we call the red button model, where drivers flow automatically, but as you're able to hit the stop button on a specific driver if it's causing an issue. And we think that automatic approval model with the layers or the rings is the best way to go, because despite the testing that OEMs do, sometimes things flow through or are unique to your environment, the combination of hardware or apps. So it's great to have a testing layer or two before you go to most devices. But then having the automatic approval so that you're not managing hundreds of drivers on a monthly basis and trying to think about each one, it gives you that balance of the system just works, but gives you the control of responding when there's a particular issue.
That's great. Thank you. That's perfect. Thanks.
Good.
I just want to also say that you do also have the ability then to select a driver that shows on the other driver tab and push it. The advantage is once a driver is approved for the service, even if it is a automatic or a recommended or a optional driver, they get delivered to the end user without any input. It gets installed like an automatic driver. And so you have full control to deliver any of the updates that you approve here to the devices without end user input.
Yeah, and if it were me, the ones that were marked firmware, I would probably go a little slower and appreciate the fact that they're almost always in the other bucket and not automatically approved, and I would approve them in my first ring and make sure that that didn't cause any issues. We're not seeing very many. We've had very few reported issues of even BitLocker or password issues. I don't think we've had any brick device issues reported in the couple of months, and we're approaching a million approved drivers so far. So that is a good sign that the OEMs are doing a good job with their quality. But because it's happened in the past, if I'm a cautious admin, I probably would, be doing that a little bit more carefully with firmware for a while until I came to trust my OEM, even more. But that was a great point, Ryan, that those are now available to you that weren't available under the update rings approach. You couldn't install any of those. And some of those, have security fixes or even functional fixes that can have a really nice impact in improving the experience for your end users. So they're worth deploying. Woohoo! You saved me, Joseph. Another question. Come on and share with us. And
sure, just one quick one. Will in the future there be a possibility to switch a policy from manual to automatic approval?
That is a great question. In fact, Ryan and I were trying to investigate that last week. And I think there's a little bit of work we have to do to enable that, but we'd like to. It came up a little bit with another partner of ours, and the reason we'd like to improve it is probably what you've discovered and why you're asking the question, which is you've decided, great, this manual, I've got a good sense of it, I'm ready to go automatic, and we don't allow you to switch it. So you basically have to spin up a new policy and then transfer all of your approvals or pauses to that new policy before you get rid of the old one. Otherwise, you're starting from scratch again. And we're like, that's not a great deal. So we need to make sure that the service properly allows us to do that. And then if so, we'll be able to make the changes in the Intune UI to enable that experience. So it is something we're looking at. I just don't have a clear timeline for that.
That's awesome, David. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to end y'all there because we're just about at time. But just if you're still on, let's give a reaction. Give a round of applause or a hearts or a thumbs up if you like today's session. I know I enjoyed a lot of this. And so David and Ryan, thanks so much for coming on EDU Endpoint Office Hours and talking to our wonderful education customers and talking about this new feature. As we wrap up, September 12th is our next meeting, and we will have the Apple team on to talk about updates to the macOS platform and managing devices with macOS. So tune in for that, and we will see you all then. If there are any questions further out regarding the driver and firmware servicing feature, feel free to use the community channel to ask your questions, and we will try to get those answers. And if we need to, we can probably reach out to David and team and get the right answers for y'all. So again, use that to your benefit where everyone else can see it. And with that, I will stop the recording and let you all go. So thank you again, David and Ryan.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Y'all
guys.
have a great day. Bye.